They say money can't buy class, but Preston Calloway thought it could buy anything, including a human soul. On a rainy Tuesday in Chicago, the tech mogul walked into an upscale restaurant with a hidden agenda: to humiliate a struggling waitress for the amusement of his wealthy friends. He offered her a life-changing amount of money to degrade herself. He expected tears. He expected gratitude. He expected her to break. What he didn't expect was for her to look him dead in the eye and deliver a 7-word answer that would dismantle his entire empire in less than 24 hours. This is the story of the billionaire who played a game he didn't understand, and the woman who checkmated him. The rain in Chicago didn't wash away the grime. It just made the city slick and treacherous. But inside the Gilded Lily, a French bistro tucked away on the edge of the Gold Coast, the weather was irrelevant. The air here smelled of truffle oil, aged cognac, and the specific metallic scent of old money. Preston Calloway sat at table 1, the power table, leaning back in his leather chair with the careless arrogance of a man who owned the building, the block, and likely the politicians representing the district. At 34, Preston was the CEO of Calloway Dynamics, a defense contracting firm that had just secured a $4 billion government tender. He was handsome in a predatory way, sharp jawline, eyes the color of polished steel, and a smile that never quite reached them. "I'm telling you, Grant, it's a biological imperative," Preston said, swirling his scotch. "Everyone has a price. It's not cynicism, it's economics. Supply and demand of dignity." Grant Harrison, his VP of operations and oldest friend from their boarding school days, laughed nervously. Grant was softer, rounder, the kind of man who enjoyed wealth, but feared the karma attached to it. "You're pushing it, Preston. We're celebrating a merger, not conducting a sociology experiment. Let the staff be." "It's boring, Grant." "Success is boring." Preston sighed, checking his Patek Philippe watch. "I want to see what happens when you apply pressure to the little people. Do they crack? Do they fold? Or do they bite?" He scanned the room. The Gilded Lily was busy for a Tuesday lunch. Waiters in crisp white jackets moved like ghosts, silent and efficient. Preston's eyes landed on a waitress near the kitchen doors. She was different from the others. While the rest of the staff wore plastic smiles, she wore a mask of absolute terrifying neutrality. Her name tag read Lydia. She looked to be in her late 20s, perhaps early 30s, with dark hair pulled back into a severe bun. There were shadows under her eyes that makeup couldn't hide, the universal signifier of someone working double shifts to keep the lights on. "Her," Preston said, nodding his chin toward Lydia. "Table 4. She's been refilling that water glass every 7 minutes exactly. Compulsive, efficient, desperate." "Leave it alone, Preston," Grant warned, taking a sip of his wine. $5,000, Preston said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "I bet you $5,000 I can get her to pour a bowl of lobster bisque into her own lap intentionally." Grant choked on his drink. "You're sick." "I'm curious," Preston corrected. "She looks like she needs the money. Look at her shoes, Grant, orthopedic insoles worn down to the rubber. She walks with a slight limp on the left side. No wedding ring, but she wears a necklace with a small, cheap charm, probably a child's. Single mother, sick parent. She's drowning, Grant. I'm just offering a lifeline." "You are offering humiliation," Grant muttered. "I'm offering choice." Preston smiled, a shark sensing blood in the water. He raised his hand, snapping his fingers with a loud, distinct crack that made 3 other tables turn their heads. Lydia didn't flinch. She finished placing a napkin at a nearby table, straightened her spine, and walked over. She didn't hurry. That was the first thing Preston noticed. She didn't scramble like a servant. She approached like a soldier reporting for duty. "Gentlemen," Lydia said. Her voice was low, raspy, and devoid of the fake cheeriness Preston was used to. "How is the Wagyu?" "The steak is adequate," Preston said, leaning forward, resting his elbows on the white tablecloth. "But the service lacks a certain entertainment value." Lydia's eyes flickered to Preston's. They were a startling shade of amber, intelligent and guarded. "I can bring the dessert menu if the conversation is lagging, sir." Grant snorted into his napkin. Preston's smile tightened. She had teeth. Good. No dessert yet, Lydia, Preston said, emphasizing her name. He reached into the inner pocket of his tailored Italian suit and pulled out a thick, creamy white envelope. He placed it on the table. The unmistakable bulk of cash inside made the paper bow slightly. "This is a tip," Preston said. $2,000. Cash. Lydia looked at the envelope, then back at Preston. Her expression didn't change. "Service is included in the bill, sir, and we pool tips here." "This isn't for the pool," Preston said smoothly. "This is a direct transaction between me and you." "And what is the service required for this transaction?" Lydia asked. She stood perfectly still, her hands clasped behind her back. Preston picked up his glass of expensive red wine, a 1998 Cabernet that cost more than Lydia likely made in a month. He held it out over the pristine white tablecloth, just past the edge of the table, hovering over the expensive Persian rug. "I want you to tell me I'm right," Preston said. "About what, sir?" "That dignity is a luxury for the rich," Preston sneered. "I want you to get down on your knees, take this glass of wine and clean my shoes with it. Right here, in front of everyone." The restaurant seemed to go silent. Grant looked away, his face turning red with second-hand embarrassment. At the next table, an elderly couple stopped eating. Lydia looked at the wine. She looked at the envelope. She looked at Preston's shoes, hand-stitched leather Oxfords, polished to a mirror shine. $2,000, Preston repeated. To wipe a little wine off a shoe. Easy money, Lydia. Think of the rent. Think of the kid. He was guessing about the kid, but he saw a micro-flinch in her jaw. He had hit a nerve. Lydia closed her eyes for a brief second, inhaling sharply. When she opened them, the amber fire was gone, replaced by a cold, dark resolve. "Is that your final offer?" she asked. Preston laughed, a booming sound that filled the room. "Negotiating. I love it. Okay, 3,000, but you have to apologize for being poor while you do it," Grant hissed. "Preston, stop it." 3,000, Lydia repeated. She took a step closer to the table. Preston beamed. He had won. He always won. He pushed the envelope toward her. "Do we have a deal?" Lydia Hart reached out. Her hand, rough and red from years of harsh detergents and hot water, hovered over the envelope. Preston watched her fingers, anticipating the tremble of greed, but she didn't take the money. She reached past the envelope and took the wine glass from his hand. Her grip was firm. "Excellent," Preston whispered, leaning back, ready for the show. He expected her to kneel. He wanted to see the submission. Instead, Lydia turned her wrist. Splash. The dark red liquid didn't hit his shoes. It hit his face. It wasn't a violent throw, it was a methodical pour. The wine cascaded over Preston's expensive haircut, dripped down his nose, stained his white collar, and soaked into the lapels of his $5,000 suit. The restaurant gasped. It was a collective intake of breath that sucked the oxygen out of the room. Grant's jaw dropped so low it nearly hit the table. Preston sat frozen, the cold liquid dripping off his chin. He was in shock. His brain couldn't process the data. The variable had rejected the input. Lydia set the empty glass down on the table with a soft clink. "I think you've had enough to drink, sir," she said, her voice carrying through the silent room. "I'll bring the check." Preston wiped his eyes, the shock replaced instantly by a blinding white-hot rage. He slammed his hands on the table, rattling the silverware. "You stupid cow!" he roared, standing up. "Do you know who I am? Do you have any idea who you just assaulted?" "I know exactly who you are, Preston Calloway," Lydia said. She didn't retreat. She stood her ground, looking small against his looming height but immovable as a mountain. "You're fired," Preston spat, wiping wine from his lips. "I'm buying this place just to fire you. I'm going to make sure you never work in this city again. I'll ruin you. I'll sue you for assault, for damages, for emotional distress. You'll be begging on the street by Monday." The manager, a frantic little man named Henry, came rushing over, wringing his hands. "Mr. Calloway, my God, I am so sorry. Lydia, what have you done? Get a towel, get out." Henry turned to Preston, practically bowing. "Sir, please, the meal is on the house. She is terminated immediately. We will call the police if you wish." Preston smirked through the wine stains. He looked down at Lydia, expecting fear. He wanted to see the realization of her mistake crush her. But Lydia was smiling. It was a small, sad smile. She reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, not an order pad, but a letter. She placed it on top of the wet tablecloth, right next to the ignored envelope of cash. "You can't fire me, Henri," Lydia said to the manager, though her eyes stayed on Preston. "I resigned 20 minutes ago. My shift ended at 1 p.m. I stayed overtime because I saw him walk in." She pointed a finger at Preston. "You stayed." Preston laughed, a cruel, wet sound. "To do what? Make a scene." "To test you," Lydia said. The dynamic in the room shifted. The guests were no longer looking at a rude billionaire and a clumsy waitress. They were watching something else, something heavier. "You tested me?" Preston scoffed. "With what? Bad service. I wanted to see if the rumors were true," Lydia said. "I wanted to see if the man who destroyed Atherton Industries was just a ruthless businessman, or if he was a monster." Preston stiffened. The room went deadly quiet again. Atherton Industries was a name from the past, a mid-sized manufacturing firm in Ohio that Callaway Dynamics had hostilely acquired 5 years ago. It was a brutal takeover. They bought the company, stripped the assets, sold the patents, and fired 2,000 workers. It was the deal that made Preston his first 100 million. It was also the deal that led to a string of suicides in the factory town. "I don't know what you're talking about," Preston said, though his voice lacked its earlier conviction. "My name isn't Lydia Hart," she said softly. "My name is Lydia Atherton. My father was Tobias Atherton. The man you shook hands with, promised to keep the factory open, and then bankrupted 3 weeks later." Grant covered his mouth with his hand. "Oh God," Preston's eyes narrowed. "Tobias, he died. Heart attack." "Stroke," Lydia corrected, "induced by stress, 2 days after you liquidated his pension fund. He died screaming about how he failed his men." Lydia took off her apron and folded it neatly. She placed it on the back of the chair. "I didn't take your money, Preston, because I don't want your crumbs. I wanted to look you in the eye and see if there was any humanity left in there, any guilt. I gave you a chance. If you had just eaten your lunch like a decent human being, I would have walked away." She leaned in close, her voice dropping to a whisper that only Preston and Grant could hear. "But you had to play God. And the problem with playing God, Preston, is that eventually the devil shows up to collect." Lydia turned and walked toward the exit. "Wait," Preston shouted. He was shaking, adrenaline and humiliation warring in his blood. "You think this speech changes anything? You're still a nobody. You're still poor. You think your daddy would be proud of you serving salads?" Lydia stopped at the door. She didn't turn around. "I'm not serving salads anymore, Preston. I passed the bar exam 3 weeks ago, and I've been hired by the Department of Justice's Antitrust Division." She looked back over her shoulder, her amber eyes burning. "I start on Monday, and you're my first case." With that, she pushed through the heavy oak doors and disappeared into the rain. Preston Callaway stood in the middle of the gilded lily, wine dripping onto the Persian rug, surrounded by stunned silence. For the first time in his life, he didn't have a comeback. "Sir," Henri, the manager, squeaked, Shall I call you a car?" Preston ignored him. He looked at Grant. Grant was pale, staring at the empty door where Lydia Atherton had vanished. "Did you know?" Preston hissed. "How could I know?" Grant whispered. "Tobias Atherton's daughter. I thought she went to Europe. I thought she disappeared." "She's bluffing," Preston said, trying to regain his composure. He smoothed his wet hair back. "Department of Justice, please. It's a lie to save face. She's a waitress. You don't go from waiting tables to the DOJ." But as he looked around the room, he saw the one thing that terrified him more than a federal investigation: phones. At table 3, a teenage girl was holding her iPhone up. At table 5, a businessman had his Android recording. The flash of a camera went off near the bar. "Put those away," Preston barked, lunging toward the teenager. "You do not have my permission to record this. It's a public space, dude," the girl said, snapping her gum. And you were shouting, "It's already on TikTok, you're trending." Preston felt a cold knot form in his stomach. He pulled out his own phone. His hands were shaking so badly he dropped it once before unlocking it. He opened Twitter. Winebay was trending. Callaway crisis was climbing. The video was already there. It had 50,000 views and was climbing by the second. The angle was perfect. It showed him offering the money. It heard the audio clearly. Apologize for being poor. It showed the wine splash. And most damning of all, it caught Lydia's exit speech. "I start on Monday, and you're my first case." Comments were pouring in like a landslide. But eat the rich. Did he really just tell her to clean his shoes? This man is a demon. Legal eagle, if she's really DOJ. This is the best origin story I've ever seen. Stock watcher, Callaway Dynamics stock is about to tank. Shorting now. Preston looked up at Grant. The blood had drained from his face. "Call the PR team," Preston ordered, his voice cracking. "Get the legal team. Get everyone. We need to kill this video. We need to discredit her. Find dirt on her. Find out if she stole forks. Anything." "Preston," Grant said quietly, looking at his own phone. "It's too late." "It is never too late when you have $1 billion. Preston screamed. "Buy the platform if you have to." He stormed out of the restaurant, pushing past Henry. The rain soaked him immediately, mixing with the wine, making him look like he was bleeding. He scrambled into the back of his waiting limousine. "Office," he barked at the driver. "Now." Inside the quiet, leather-scented sanctuary of the car, Preston tried to breathe. It was just a viral moment. They happened all the time. People would be outraged for 24 hours, and then they would move on to a cat video. He just needed to weather the storm. He poured himself a drink from the car's minibar, his hands still trembling. Lydia Atherton. He remembered Tobias. The old man had begged. He had cried in the boardroom. Preston had laughed then, too. He had told Tobias that sentimentality was a liability. She passed the bar exam. Preston pulled up his secure contacts. He needed to call Senator Mitchell. He needed to call his fixer, a shadowy man named Elias who made problems disappear. "Elias," Preston said when the line connected. "I have a situation." "I saw the video, Preston." Elias's voice was gravelly and unimpressed. "You look like a fool." "I don't pay you for movie reviews." Preston snapped. "I need you to dig into a woman named Lydia Atherton. She claims she's with the DOJ. I need that to be false. And if it's true, I need her buried in paperwork, red tape, or scandal before Monday morning." "The DOJ isn't the local police, Preston," Elias warned. "And if she's really Tobias's daughter, she has motive. A vengeful prosecutor with a viral mandate. That's dangerous." "Just fix it," Preston yelled and hung up. He looked out the window. The car was passing a large electronic billboard in Times Square. Usually it showed ads for Coca-Cola or movies. But as he watched, the ad changed. It was a news ticker. "Billionaire bully Callaway CEO goes viral in restaurant meltdown." And underneath, a stock ticker showed Callaway Dynamics Carl down 4% in 10 minutes. Preston closed his eyes. This wasn't a prank. This wasn't a game. Lydia hadn't just poured wine on him. She had poured blood in the water. And the sharks were coming. But Preston Callaway wasn't a man who rolled over. If Lydia wanted a war, he would give her one. He would destroy her just like he destroyed her father. He would make sure that by Monday she wasn't prosecuting cases. She would be lucky to be cleaning toilets. He opened his laptop. "Okay, Lydia," he whispered to the screen. "Let's see what you're made of." The penthouse office of Callaway Dynamics was a fortress of glass and steel, hovering 40 stories above the chaos of Chicago. Inside, the silence was deafening. It was 3 a.m., 14 hours after the incident at the Gilded Lily. Preston Callaway hadn't slept. He sat at his sprawling mahogany desk, his face illuminated by the harsh blue light of 3 monitors. His tie was undone, his sleeves rolled up. The wine-stained suit lay in a crumpled heap in the corner, a discarded skin. On the screens, the war was unfolding. The video had crossed 5 million views. It was on CNN, Fox, and the BBC. The narrative was simple and devastating: the arrogant prince versus the working-class hero. But Preston wasn't looking at the video anymore. He was looking at a dossier Elias had just sent over. Lydia Atherton, age 32. Education, University of Chicago Law, graduated top 5%. Employment history, waitress, The Gilded Lily, barista, Joe's Coffee, night shift janitor, Callaway Tower, 2021. Preston froze. He reread the last line, janitor, Callaway Tower, 2021. She had been here, in his building, cleaning his floors while he plotted the takeover of another company. She had been invisible, a ghost in the machine, watching him from the periphery. She wasn't just surviving, Preston muttered to the empty room. She was gathering intelligence. He picked up his phone and dialed Elias. "Did you see this? She worked here." "I saw it," Elias replied, his voice calm, "and I found something else." During her time as a janitor, there were 3 security breaches in the archives department. Nothing was reported stolen, but logs show access cards were used at unauthorized times. She stole files, Preston realized, a cold sweat breaking out on his neck. She didn't just study law, she built a case. She has internal documents. "We don't know that for sure," Elias said, "but we have to assume the worst. If she has the Atherton acquisition papers, the real ones, not the sanitized version we showed the SEC, you're looking at federal prison, Preston. Fraud, embezzlement, insider trading." Preston slammed his fist on the desk. "Burn her. I want her credibility destroyed before she steps foot in that office on Monday. Leak the story that she was fired for theft. Say she's unstable. Say she stalked me. Make her look like a crazy ex-employee with a grudge. It's in motion," Elias said. "I have a contact at the Chicago Tribune. The story runs tomorrow morning. Waitress hero or corporate spy. The dark past of Lydia Atherton." Across town, in a cramped studio apartment in Pilsen, Lydia Atherton was awake too. She wasn't looking at screens. She was looking at a box. It was an old, battered cardboard box labeled Dad's Office. She sat on the floor, surrounded by legal textbooks and sticky notes. The apartment was sparse, a mattress on the floor, a desk made of 2 sawhorses and a plank of wood. Every spare dollar had gone to tuition. Every spare hour had gone to studying. She opened the box. Inside was a hard drive. It was clunky, an older model from 5 years ago. Her father, Tobias, had given it to her on his deathbed. His last words were raspy and desperate. "Don't let them win, Lyd. The proof is in the numbers." They cooked the books. They devalued the assets before the buy. For 5 years, she hadn't touched it. She knew she wasn't ready. She needed the weapon of the law to wield the truth. But now, after the encounter at the restaurant, the timer had started. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from the hallway. Lydia stiffened. It was the sound of the front door to her building being kicked in. She didn't panic. She had expected this. Men like Preston Callaway didn't wait for court dates. She grabbed the hard drive and shoved it into the hollowed-out bottom of a frozen bag of peas in her mini freezer. It was a cliché, but it bought time. Seconds later, her apartment door splintered. 2 men in dark tactical gear burst in. They wore balaclavas, no badges, no warrants. Lydia stood up, raising her hands, but her eyes were fierce. "Get out of my house!" One of the men stepped forward holding a baton. "Where is it, Lydia? The drive. Give it to us and we leave. No one gets hurt." "I don't know what you're talking about," she lied, her voice steady. The man sighed. "Check the place." They tore the apartment apart. They flipped the mattress, swept the books off the desk, smashed her laptop, and emptied the drawers. Lydia watched, her heart hammering against her ribs, praying they wouldn't check the freezer. The first man approached her. "Mr. Callaway sends his regards. He wants you to know that Monday is going to be a very hard day for you." He raised the baton, not to hit her, but to smash the framed photo of her father on the nightstand. The glass shattered. "A warning," the man said. "Drop the case. So next time, we don't just break the furniture." They left as quickly as they came, leaving Lydia standing in the wreckage of her life. She waited 5 minutes, trembling. Then, she walked to the freezer, retrieved the bag of peas, and took out the cold, hard drive. She pulled out her phone. It was cracked, but it worked. She dialed a number she had memorized but never called. "Agent Miller?" she said when the voice answered. "This is Lydia Atherton. I'm ready to come in, and I have the evidence." Monday morning arrived with the subtlety of a sledgehammer. The headline in the Chicago Tribune was brutal. "Viral vigilante. Is Lydia Atherton a con artist?" The article, anonymously sourced, claimed Lydia had a history of theft, mental instability, and an unhealthy obsession with Preston Calloway. It painted her as a stalker who staged the restaurant incident for fame. Preston read it in his limo and smiled. "Good work, Elias. The narrative is shifting." Social media was fickle. The comments were already turning. Truthseeker99, IDK, "She does look kinda crazy in that video. Who pours wine on a billionaire?" Crypto King, "She's just looking for a payout." Fake news. Preston walked into Callaway Dynamics feeling invincible again. He had a 10 a.m. board meeting to reassure investors. He would spin this as a corporate espionage attempt that he had heroically thwarted. But when he walked into the boardroom, the atmosphere was wrong. The board members weren't sitting. They were standing by the window, looking down at the street. "What's going on?" Preston asked, setting his briefcase down. "Why the long faces? Stock is recovering, isn't it?" "Preston," said Eleanor Vance, the chairwoman of the board. She was a woman of iron will in her 60s who had seen CEOs come and go. "Come look at this." Preston walked to the window. 40 stories down, the plaza in front of Callaway Tower was a sea of people, thousands of them. They were holding signs. "Justice for Lydia. We are the waiting staff. Eat the rich." And in the center of the crowd, standing on a makeshift stage with a megaphone, was Lydia Atherton. She wasn't hiding. She wasn't in a DOJ office. She was right at his front door. "She's holding a press conference," Eleanor said coldly. "Live on every network." Preston turned on the large boardroom TV. There was Lydia, wearing a simple grey suit, cheap but sharp. She looked tired, but her voice was amplifying across the plaza and into millions of living rooms. "They broke into my home on Friday night," Lydia's voice boomed from the TV. "They tried to intimidate me. They tried to steal the evidence I have. They tried to smear my name in the papers this morning." She held up the hard drive. "This is the drive my father died protecting. It contains the real financial records of Atherton Industries. It proves that Preston Calloway didn't just buy our company. He sabotaged it from the inside to lower the stock price before the acquisition. He destroyed 2,000 jobs to save himself 15% on the purchase price." The crowd roared. "I am handing this over to the Department of Justice today," Lydia continued. "But I wanted you all to see it first, because they will try to bury it. They will try to bury me, but they can't bury the truth when the whole world is watching." Preston stared at the screen. His face was grey. "Is it true, Preston?" Eleanor asked, her voice quiet and dangerous. "Did you sabotage the Atherton deal?" "It was business," Preston snapped, sweating. "Strategies, aggressive negotiations, everyone does it." "That's illegal, Preston," Eleanor said. "That's market manipulation. That's fraud." "It's only fraud if you get caught," Preston yelled. "And she's lying. That drive is probably empty. It's a prop." Suddenly, the doors to the boardroom opened. Preston spun around, expecting his secretary with coffee. Instead, 6 men in windbreakers walked in. On the back of their jackets, in bright yellow letters, was FBI. Leading them was a stern-looking man with a buzz-cut, Agent Miller. And right behind him, looking small but triumphant, was Lydia Atherton. "Preston Calloway," Agent Miller said, holding up a warrant. "You are under arrest for securities fraud, wire fraud, and conspiracy to commit corporate espionage." Preston laughed nervously. "You can't be serious. You're arresting me in my own boardroom. Based on what? The word of a waitress?" Lydia stepped forward. She wasn't smiling. She looked sad, almost. "Not a waitress, Preston," she said. "Assistant United States Attorney. I was sworn in an hour ago. This is my first case." She placed a pair of handcuffs on the mahogany table. "You offered me $3,000 to apologize for being poor," Lydia said. "I'm offering you the right to remain silent. I suggest you take it." Preston looked at the handcuffs. He looked at the board members who were all averting their gaze. He looked at Grant, who was weeping silently in the corner. He realized with a jolt of terror that his money couldn't fix this. The bribe hadn't worked. The smear campaign hadn't worked. The intimidation hadn't worked. He had pushed the wrong person. I want my lawyer," Preston whispered. "You're going to need a whole team of them," Lydia said. "Turn around. The trial of United States v. Preston Calloway was dubbed the trial of the century by the media. Though the century was still young, it lasted 6 months. It was a circus, but inside the courtroom, it was a slaughter. Lydia Atherton was methodical. She didn't play to the cameras, she played to the jury. She unraveled Calloway's empire thread by thread. She brought in the former workers of Atherton Industries, men and women who had lost their homes, their pensions, their dignity. She put them on the stand, not to cry, but to testify to the specific dates and times they were ordered to halt production, to sabotage machines, to create the illusion of a failing company so Calloway could buy it cheap. Preston sat at the defense table, watching his life disintegrate. He looked smaller every day. The expensive suits hung loosely on his frame. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a hollow, haunted look. His defense team, the most expensive in the country, tried everything. They objected. They diverted. They blamed Grant, who had turned state's witness in exchange for a lighter sentence. But the hard drive was the nail in the coffin. It contained emails from Preston explicitly ordering the sabotage. "Break the supply chain," one email read. "I want the stock under $10 by Friday. Make them bleed." On the final day of closing arguments, the courtroom was packed. Lydia stood before the jury. She didn't use notes. "Preston Calloway treats the world like a restaurant where he is the only customer," Lydia began. "He believes that every person has a price, that every law is a suggestion, and that dignity is something you can buy with an envelope of cash." She walked over to the defense table and looked Preston in the eye. "He asked me once to clean his shoes to prove a point about power. He wanted to show that money makes him superior. But the truth is, money just makes him loud. It makes him insulated. It makes him forget that the people he steps on are the ones holding up the floor he stands on." She turned back to the jury. "This isn't just about a bad business deal. This is about the belief that some people matter and others don't. It's about the arrogance of a man who thought he could crush a father and buy the silence of his daughter. He was wrong. Guilty. On all counts." The jury deliberated for 4 hours. When the foreman read the verdict, the room was silent. Guilty, guilty, guilty. 32 counts of fraud. Preston didn't scream, he didn't cry, he just slumped in his chair, staring at the table. The judge, a no-nonsense woman named Judge Calloway, peered over her glasses. "Mr. Calloway, you have shown zero remorse. You have destroyed thousands of lives for profit. I am sentencing you to 25 years in federal prison. No possibility of parole for 20 years. The gavel banged. It sounded like a gunshot. As the bailiffs moved to take Preston away, he looked back. He was searching for someone in the crowd. He found her. Lydia was packing up her briefcase. She didn't look triumphant. She looked done. "Lydia!" Preston called out, his voice desperate. "Lydia, wait!" She paused, looking up. "Why?" he asked, tears finally streaming down his face. "You could have taken the money. You could have walked away. Why do this? Why ruin everything?" Lydia walked over to the railing. She looked at the man who had been a titan of industry, now reduced to a prisoner in an orange jumpsuit. "Because, Preston," she said, her voice calm and clear, "some things aren't for sale." She turned and walked out of the courtroom, the heavy doors closing behind her with a definitive thud. Outside the courthouse, the steps were mobbed. Reporters shoved microphones in her face. Flashbulbs blinded her. "Lydia, how do you feel? Is it justice? What will you do now?" Lydia stopped at the bottom of the steps. The rain had started again, a light drizzle similar to that day at the restaurant. She looked at the sky. She thought of her father. She thought of the smell of the factory floor, the grease on his hands, the pride in his eyes before the fall. "I feel," she started, then paused. She saw a young girl in the crowd, holding a sign that said, "Thank you, Lydia." The girl looked like she worked hard. Tired eyes, worn shoes. Lydia smiled at her. "I feel like getting back to work," Lydia said. "There are a lot of other tables to clean." She walked through the crowd, not as a celebrity, but as a public servant. The billionaire slayer moniker would stick, but she didn't care about the fame. She cared about the work, because somewhere in the city, another Preston Calloway was ordering a bottle of wine, thinking he owned the world. And someone had to be ready to pour it on him. 5 years had passed since the gavel struck the woodblock in Judge Holloway's courtroom, a sound that had resonated through Chicago like a thunderclap. The city, in its infinite resilience, had moved on, but the scars and the monuments of the Calloway affair remained. The skyline, once dominated by the cold, phallic arrogance of Calloway Tower, had undergone a transformation that was both physical and spiritual. The chrome lettering that had spelled out the billionaire's name had been dismantled, letter by letter, in a public spectacle that rivaled the falling of statues in conquered cities. In its place, modest, modern signage now read, "The Atherton Center for Justice and Community." It wasn't just a building anymore. It was a living organism. Where Preston Calloway had once plotted hostile takeovers in a silent, air-conditioned penthouse, children from the South Side now learned coding. Floors that had once housed corporate lawyers devising tax loopholes were now occupied by legal aid clinics, immigration advocates, and job training programs for the formerly incarcerated. The building breathed. It hummed with a chaotic, vibrant energy that Preston would have despised. Lydia Atherton stood across the street, pulling her coat tighter against the biting November wind. She watched the people streaming in and out of the revolving doors. She saw a young mother pushing a stroller, laughing with a man holding a stack of resumes. She saw a group of teenagers debating loudly about a community project. Lydia was 37 now. The years of high-stakes litigation had etched fine lines around her eyes and woven strands of silver into her dark hair. She didn't dye them. She earned them. She was the Assistant United States Attorney who had taken down the Titan of Chicago, and that victory had come with a weight she carried every day. She wasn't rich. The government salary was comfortable, but it didn't buy Patek Philippe watches or private islands. She still lived in a modest apartment, though it was an upgrade from the studio in Pilsen. She still took the train. She still made her own coffee. But she possessed a wealth that Preston Calloway had never understood. She could sleep at night. "Counselor?" Lydia turned. A young man in a sharp, inexpensive suit was standing there, holding 2 coffees. It was David, her junior associate. He looked at her with a mixture of awe and terror that most of the new hires had. "You're staring at the building again, Lydia," David said, handing her a cup. "Checking for structural integrity?" Lydia smiled, taking the warmth into her cold hands. "Just remembering, David. It used to be a fortress, now it's a lighthouse. We're going to be late for the debrief on the Farmco case," David reminded her gently. "Go ahead," Lydia said. "I'm taking a personal lunch today. I have an anniversary to keep." David raised an eyebrow. "Anniversary? Happy or sad?" "Neither," Lydia said, turning away from the building. "Necessary." The walk to the Gilded Lily took 20 minutes. Lydia walked with the rhythm of the city, her heels clicking on the pavement, not the worn-down orthopedic shoes of her waitressing days, but sensible, sturdy pumps. She passed the newsstands. The headlines were about a mayoral scandal and the Bears' losing streak. Preston Calloway was yesterday's news. He was history. But for Lydia, he was a ghost that still lingered in the geography of the Gold Coast. She reached the restaurant. The exterior had changed. The intimidating black awnings were gone, replaced by a softer navy blue. The heavy oak doors, which had felt like the gates to a castle she wasn't allowed to enter, were propped open. She stepped inside. The smell hit her first: truffle oil, garlic, and expensive wine. It was a sensory trigger that momentarily froze her lungs. For a split second, she was back in the polyester uniform, her feet aching, the tray heavy on her shoulder, terrified of dropping a fork. The phantom pain of servitude washed over her. Then she exhaled. She touched the DOJ badge clipped to her belt, hidden under her blazer, a totem of reality. She wasn't that woman anymore. "Welcome to the Lily," a hostess chirped. She was young, vibrant, with bright pink streaks in her hair, something the old management would have fired her for on the spot. "Just one today?" "Just one," Lydia said. "Do you have a preference on seating?" Lydia looked across the dining room. It was busy, the lunch rush in full swing. Suits, tourists, ladies who lunched, and there, in the center of the room, sat table 1, the power table. It was currently occupied by a group of 4 women, laughing over salads. They looked like teachers celebrating a birthday. "Table 4, if it's open," Lydia said. "The corner spot?" "Sure thing, right this way." Lydia followed the hostess, her heart beating a slow, steady rhythm. Table 4, the vantage point, the spot where she had stood for hours, refilling water, watching the masters of the universe eat. She sat down. The chair was velvet plush. She ran her hand over the tablecloth. It was still white, still crisp. A waiter approached. He was a man in his 50s, with kind eyes and a name tag that read Samuel. "Good afternoon," Samuel said, placing a menu in front of her. "Can I start you off with something to drink? Perhaps a glass of wine?" Lydia looked at the wine list. She saw the Cabernets, the Merlots, the bottles that cost more than a mortgage payment. "Sparkling water," Lydia said, "with lime. Excellent choice." As Samuel walked away, Lydia looked around the room. She wasn't looking for Preston, she was looking for herself. She was looking for the ghost of the woman who had stood by the kitchen doors, invisible and desperate. She remembered the fear she felt that day. Not fear of Preston, but fear of poverty. The fear of not making rent. The fear that her father's death would mean nothing. That envelope of money, $3,000, had been a fortune. It could have fixed her car. It could have paid off her credit card. Why didn't I take it? She asked herself, not for the first time. It wasn't just pride, it was survival. If she had taken that money, she would have sold the only thing she had left, the truth. She would have become another asset in Preston's portfolio, another thing he had bought and broken. "Your water, ma'am," Samuel said, returning. "Are you ready to order?" Lydia looked at the menu. The prices had gone up, naturally. "I'll have the Cobb salad," she said. "And Samuel?" "Yes, ma'am. Do you enjoy working here?" Samuel blinked, surprised by the question. He looked at her, really looked at her, gauging if she was a secret shopper or a critic. He saw the kindness in her eyes. "I do, actually," Samuel said. "The new owners. They're fair. We get benefits now. Paid time off. It's a job, you know, but it's a good one." Lydia smiled. "I'm glad to hear that." "You look familiar," Samuel said, tilting his head. "Have you been here before?" "A long time ago," Lydia said, "in another life." Samuel nodded, sensing she didn't want to elaborate, and retreated to the kitchen. While she waited for her food, Lydia pulled out her tablet. She had a habit she couldn't break. She opened the Federal Bureau of Prisons inmate locator. She typed in the number 78402-054. Result: name Calloway, Preston location, FCI Terre Haute status, in custody release date, November 12, 2044. She clicked on the recent activity log, a privilege of her clearance. Preston wasn't in the laundry anymore. He had been moved to the library. He was teaching a GED class to other inmates. Lydia stared at the screen. The man who had sneered at the uneducated, who had mocked poverty, was now teaching basic math to drug dealers and bank robbers. She had heard rumors from the prison guards. The first year broke him. He was solitary, angry, constantly filing frivolous appeals. He tried to bribe guards. He tried to hire hits. He was thrown in the hole 3 times, but around year 3, something shifted. The money ran out. The friends stopped visiting. Grant Harrison, who had received a light sentence of 2 years, had been released and never looked back. Preston was alone. Stripped of his audience, the performance ended. He had to become a person. Lydia closed the tab. She didn't feel sorry for him. He was where he belonged. But she felt a strange sense of closure knowing that he was forced to be useful. He was finally contributing to society, even if it was at gunpoint. Her salad arrived. She ate slowly, savoring the silence. Suddenly, a commotion at the front of the restaurant caught her attention. A man was raising his voice. He was young, wearing a flashy designer suit that looked too tight. He was snapping his fingers at the hostess. "I don't care about a reservation," the man shouted. "Do you know who my father is? I want a table now." The restaurant went quiet. It was a scene straight out of a nightmare. A déjà vu so potent it made Lydia dizzy. The hostess looked flustered. "Sir, we are fully booked. I can put you on the list." "I'm not going on a list." The man spat. He looked around the room, his eyes landing on a table near the window where an elderly couple was finishing their coffee. "Move them. I want that table." Lydia put down her fork. She wiped her mouth with the napkin. She watched Samuel, the waiter, step forward. "Sir, please lower your voice. You are disturbing the guests." "Get out of my face, Grandpa," the young man sneered, "or I'll buy this place and fire you." Lydia stood up. The chair scraped against the floor. The sound was familiar. She walked across the room. She didn't rush. She moved with the fluid, lethal grace of a predator who knows exactly where the jugular is. She stopped 3 feet from the shouting man. "Excuse me," Lydia said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it projected. It was the voice that had commanded grand juries and silenced defense attorneys. The young man turned. He looked her up and down, dismissing her cheap suit. "Who are you?" "The manager." "No," Lydia said. "I'm a customer who is trying to enjoy her lunch, and you are boring me." The man laughed, a harsh, incredulous sound. "Boring you? Lady, I'm worth more than your entire life." Lydia smiled. It was the same smile she had given Preston 5 years ago. Sad, amused, and dangerous. "I've heard that line before," she said, "from a man with a much better suit than yours. Do you know where he is now?" The man frowned. "What?" "He's in Terre Haute," Lydia said, stepping closer, "cleaning toilets and teaching fractions, because he thought money made him untouchable. He found out that the Department of Justice has a very different exchange rate." She reached into her pocket and pulled out her badge. She let the gold eagle catch the light. The color drained from the young man's face. "Disorderly conduct," Lydia listed casually. "Public disturbance, harassment, and if you continue to threaten the staff, I could probably make a case for assault. I have a very low tolerance for bullies in dining establishments. It's a personal pet peeve." The man looked at the badge, then at Lydia's face. He saw the steel in her eyes. He realized this wasn't a bluff. I was just leaving," he stammered. "Excellent choice," Lydia said. "Don't let the door hit you." The man turned and practically ran out of the restaurant. The silence in the room held for a second, and then the elderly woman at the window table started to clap. Then the table of teachers joined in. Soon, the whole restaurant was applauding. Lydia felt her cheeks flush. She wasn't used to applause outside of a courtroom. She nodded briefly to Samuel, who was looking at her with wide, recognizing eyes. "It is you," Samuel whispered. "The wine lady." Lydia laughed. "Please, don't call me that. I'm just Lydia." She went back to her table, finished her salad, and asked for the check. When Samuel brought the bill, he also brought a small slice of chocolate cake. "On the house," Samuel said, "from the owner. He's in the back, but he saw what happened on the security feed. He says you're welcome here any time. No charge." Lydia looked at the cake. She picked up her fork. "Tell him thank you," Lydia said, "but I'll pay for the lunch. The cake, I'll accept." She took a bite. It was rich, sweet, and decadent. It tasted like victory. Not the loud, crashing victory of the trial, but the quiet, sustainable victory of a life reclaimed. She paid the bill $28.50. She left a $50 tip. As she walked toward the door, she paused at table 1. The power table was empty now. She placed her hand on the back of the chair where Preston had sat. She imagined him there, frozen in time, the wine dripping from his chin. "Goodbye, Preston," she whispered. She pushed through the doors and stepped out into the city. The wind had picked up, but Lydia didn't feel the cold. She felt electric. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out. It was a text from Attorney General Vance, the same woman who had chaired the Callaway board and later, in a twist of fate, had been appointed to lead the Justice Department's regional office. She had hired Lydia personally. Vance, the Farmco subpoena is ready. They're shredding documents as we speak. We need to move. Are you ready for another war? Lydia looked at the text. She looked at the Atherton Center across the street. She thought of her father, Tobias, who had died with a broken heart. She thought of the young man she had just scared off. She thought of Preston folding sheets. The war never really ended. Greed was a hydra, cut off one head, and two more grew in bespoke suits. There would always be men who thought they could buy the world. But as long as there were people like her, people who remembered what it was like to be on the other side of the table, there would be a fight. Lydia typed her reply. Lydia, I was born ready, on my way. She pocketed the phone, adjusted her collar, and stepped off the curb. The light turned green. The traffic stopped. Lydia Atherton walked into the intersection, head high, marching toward the next battle, the next bully, and the next chance to balance the scales. The city of Chicago roared around her, a symphony of chaos and commerce. But Lydia moved to her own rhythm now. She wasn't serving the meal anymore. She was setting the table. And that is the story of Lydia Atherton and Preston Calloway. It's a story that started with a spilled glass of wine and ended with a redefined city. Preston Calloway wanted to know if everyone had a price. He found out the hard way that some people deal in a currency he couldn't counterfeit: integrity. He thought he was playing a game with a powerless waitress, never realizing that she was the one holding all the cards of truth, history, and the law. This story reminds us that every person you meet, no matter their job title or uniform, has a story you don't know and a strength you shouldn't test. It challenges us to look at the little people in our lives, the servers, the cleaners, the drivers, and see them not as background characters, but as the potential heroes of their own epics. We live in a world that often rewards the loud and the ruthless. But Lydia teaches us that the quietest voice in the room is often the most dangerous, and that dignity is the ultimate shield. If this story gave you chills, or if you've ever wanted to pour a drink on a bully, please hit that like button right now. It helps us share these stories with more people. What did you think of Lydia's choice? Would you have taken the money? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. And if you want more stories about justice, revenge, and the human spirit, make sure you subscribe and ring the notification bell if you don't want to miss what we have cooking for you next. Thanks for watching, and remember, be kind. You never know who you're talking to.